Marcus Chun had been the night custodian at the Galactic Research Station for 3 years, and he'd grown accustomed to the strange sounds that echoed through the corridors after hours. The facility housed over 40 different alien species, each conducting their own research projects under the watchful eye of the Intergalactic Science Consortium. Most beings avoided the human quarters, viewing his species as an oddity, neither the strongest, fastest, nor most intelligent race in the galaxy, yet somehow they'd earned a place among the stars. Tonight felt different. As Marcus pushed his cleaning cart down the dimly lit corridor of Sector 7, he heard something that made him pause. It wasn't the usual hum of machinery or the distant chatter of nocturnal species working late. This was a soft, rhythmic sound, almost like crying, but not quite human. Following the sound, Marcus turned down a side passage he rarely visited. The lighting here was adjusted for species with different visual spectrums, casting everything in an eerie blue-green glow. The crying grew louder as he approached a maintenance alcove tucked between two research labs. His flashlight beam revealed a small figure huddled against the wall. It was a Zephyrian cub, no bigger than a human child of maybe 8 years old. The creature's silver fur was matted and dull, and its large, luminous eyes reflected Marcus's flashlight like mirrors. Zephyrians were apex predators from the ice world of Zephyr Prime, known throughout the galaxy for their ferocity and pack hunting tactics. Adult Zephyrians stood nearly 8 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws and teeth that could tear through starship hull plating. But this one was just a baby, shivering uncontrollably in the station's climate-controlled environment. Marcus knew enough about Zephyrian biology to understand the problem immediately. Their homeworld was a frozen wasteland where temperatures rarely rose above -50 degrees Celsius. The space station maintained a comfortable 22 degrees for the majority of species, tropical by Zephyrian standards. The cub was suffering from heat exposure, which for its species meant anything above freezing. The logical thing would have been to contact station security or the Zephyrian research team. There were protocols for lost or displaced juveniles. But something about the small creature's distressed whimpering touched something deep in Marcus's chest. Maybe it was his paternal instincts. He had a daughter back on Earth he hadn't seen in 2 years. Maybe it was just basic human compassion, that inexplicable drive to help the vulnerable that had gotten his species both into trouble and out of it countless times throughout history. Without thinking, Marcus shrugged off his maintenance jacket, a thick, insulated coat designed for working in the station's colder storage areas. The jacket was oversized on his lean frame, but it would be perfect for the small Zephyrian. Slowly, speaking in the soft tones he'd use with any frightened animal, Marcus approached the cub. "Hey there, little one," he whispered, crouching down to make himself less intimidating. "You're cold, aren't you?" The cub's ears flattened against its head, and it pressed further into the corner. Marcus could see the creature's breath forming small puffs in the warmer air, a sign of severe thermal distress. Moving carefully, he held out the jacket. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. This will help." For a moment, neither moved. Then, perhaps driven by desperation, the cub allowed Marcus to wrap the insulated jacket around its small body. The relief was immediate. The creature's breathing slowed, and its shivering began to subside. The jacket was enormous on the cub, enveloping it like a tent, but it trapped the Zephyrian's naturally lower body heat and provided insulation against the station's warmth. Marcus sat back on his heels, studying the young alien. Now that it wasn't in immediate distress, he could see that it was actually quite beautiful. Zephyrian cubs had an almost ethereal quality, with their silver fur catching and reflecting light in mesmerizing patterns. Its eyes were a deep violet color, large and expressive in the way that all young creatures' eyes seem to be. "Where's your family, little guy?" Marcus asked gently. He knew the cub couldn't understand English, but his tone seemed to have a calming effect. As if summoned by his question, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy, measured steps that could only belong to an adult Zephyrian. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. He'd been around the alien researchers long enough to know that Zephyrians were fiercely protective of their young. Finding a human alone with a Zephyrian cub could be interpreted as a threat. The footsteps stopped just outside the alcove, and Marcus slowly turned to see a massive Zephyrian female blocking the entrance. She stood over 7 feet tall, her silver fur darker than her cub's, marked with the scars that indicated her status as a veteran hunter. Her violet eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made his mouth go dry. This had to be the cub's mother, and she did not look pleased. For several tense seconds, nobody moved. The cub made a small sound, not distressed, but almost explanatory. Its mother's gaze shifted to her offspring, wrapped in Marcus's jacket, then back to the human. Marcus could practically see her calculating whether he was threat or savior. Slowly, carefully, Marcus stood up. She was cold, he said simply, knowing the words themselves meant nothing, but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. I was just trying to help. The mother Zephyrian took a step forward, and Marcus fought every instinct that told him to run. These creatures could move faster than a human I could track. If she decided he was a threat, he'd be dead before he could take a step. Instead, she bent down and gently scooped up her cub, jacket and all. The little one nuzzled against her neck, safe at last. For a moment, the mother's eyes met Marcus's again. There was something different in them now, not gratitude exactly, but a kind of acknowledgement. She gave him a slight nod, then turned and disappeared down the corridor with her young one, moving with the silent grace that made Zephyrians such feared predators. Marcus stood alone in the alcove, his heart still pounding. He'd lost his jacket, but somehow that seemed like a fair trade. As he gathered his cleaning supplies and continued his rounds, he couldn't shake the image of those large violet eyes, both mother and child, looking at him with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. The rest of his shift passed without incident, but Marcus found himself thinking about the encounter long after he'd returned to his small quarters. In the 3 years he'd worked on the station, he'd rarely had any meaningful interaction with the alien researchers. Humans were tolerated, but not particularly welcomed. They were seen as useful, but unremarkable, good for manual labor and basic maintenance, but not much else. Maybe that was about to change. Or maybe he just had a brief moment of connection that would be forgotten by morning. Either way, Marcus fell asleep thinking about a small silver creature wrapped in his coat, finally warm and safe in its mother's arms. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would soon change not just his life, but the way an entire species viewed humanity. The Zephyrians were about to learn something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the strange, soft creatures from the third planet of an unremarkable star system. They were about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy wasn't claws or fangs or superior technology. Sometimes it was something as simple as a gentle heart and the willingness to help, even when logic said you shouldn't. Marcus woke the next morning to an unusual sound outside his quarters, a soft scratching at his door, rhythmic and persistent. Living on a space station meant you learned to identify every sound, every vibration that might indicate a problem. This was something new. He pulled on a spare maintenance uniform and palmed the door control. The panel slid open to reveal a sight that made him blink in confusion. 3 Zephyrian cubs sat in the corridor outside his door, their silver fur gleaming under the station's artificial lighting. They looked up at him with those impossibly large violet eyes, tails swishing slowly against the metal floor. One of them was the cub from the night before. Marcus recognized the slightly smaller build and the way its left ear had a small notch in it. But the other 2 were strangers. All 3 wore what appeared to be crude coverings made from thermal blankets, wrapped around their bodies in imitation of the jacket he'd given to the first cub. Marcus glanced up and down the corridor, expecting to see their parents lurking nearby. Zephyrian adults were notoriously protective, and he couldn't imagine they'd allow their young to wander the station alone. But the hallway was empty except for a maintenance drone humming quietly as it polished the walls. "Hello," Marcus said, feeling somewhat ridiculous. The cubs tilted their heads in unison, a gesture so perfectly synchronized it was almost comical. "Are you waiting for something?" The middle cub, the one he'd helped the night before, made a soft chittering sound and patted the floor beside itself with a small paw. The meaning was unmistakable. It wanted him to sit down. With them, Marcus looked around the corridor again. His shift didn't start for another 2 hours, and the main walkways would be filling up with researchers soon. 3 Zephyrian cubs sitting outside a human's quarters was bound to attract attention, and probably not the good kind. But something about their expectant expressions made it impossible to simply shoo them away. Feeling slightly foolish, Marcus settled down on the floor across from the 3 cubs. They immediately perked up, ears forward, and the smallest one, barely the size of a human toddler, scooted closer. It sniffed his hand cautiously, then bumped its head against his palm in what he recognized as a friendly gesture from Earth cats. "You guys are going to get me in trouble," Marcus murmured, but he found himself smiling as he gently scratched behind the small cub's ears. Its fur was incredibly soft, like silk mixed with down feathers. A soft, rumbling sound emanated from its chest, the Zephyrian equivalent of purring. The sound drew the attention of a passing researcher, a tall, crystalline being from the Silicate Collective. It stopped, its faceted head turning to observe the unusual scene. Marcus tensed, expecting a complaint or at least a pointed question about why he was fraternizing with alien juveniles during off-duty hours. Instead, the researcher simply stood there for a moment, its crystalline structure flickering with what Marcus had learned was the equivalent of curiosity. "Fascinating," the being said in its tinkling wind chime voice. Young Zephyrians typically exhibit extreme xenophobia toward non-pack species. This behavior is unprecedented. Before Marcus could respond, the researcher continued on its way, leaving him alone with the cubs. The smallest one had apparently decided that Marcus was now part of the pack because it crawled into his lap and curled up, wrapping its tail around itself. The other 2 moved closer, forming a small circle with Marcus at the center. This was how Dr. Keela Vorthak found them 20 minutes later. Dr. Vorthak was the head of the Zephyrian research team and, according to station gossip, one of the most feared predators in known space. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, with a distinctive black-striped silver fur that marked her as a pack leader. Her violet eyes were sharp and intelligent, and the scars across her muzzle told the story of countless hunts and battles. When she rounded the corner and saw a human surrounded by Zephyrian cubs, her expression was unreadable. Marcus froze. The cubs, however, seemed completely unconcerned by their pack leader's arrival. The smallest one was actually asleep in his lap, and the other 2 were still purring softly as he absently petted them. Dr. Vorthak approached slowly, her massive form moving with the liquid grace that made Zephyrians such effective hunters. She stopped just outside what Marcus guessed was their personal space bubble and studied the scene with those piercing eyes. "Custodian Chun," she said in perfect, if slightly accented, English. Her voice was deep and resonant, with an undertone that seemed to vibrate through his bones. "Dr. Vorthak," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I can explain." She held up a clawed hand, and he fell silent. "These are my offspring," she said, gesturing to the cubs. "Kira, Zane, and Lil Pip." At the sound of their names, the cubs looked up at their mother, but none of them moved away from Marcus. "They have been speaking of you," Dr. Vorthak continued, settling into a crouch that put her at Marcus's eye level. Even crouched, she was still imposing. "Kira tells me you gave her your protection hide when she was suffering from heat sickness last night." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. The cub in his lap, apparently Pip, stirred slightly, but didn't wake. "This is unusual behavior for your species," Dr. Vorthak said. "Humans are not known for their generosity toward predator-class beings. Most sapients avoid us, and for good reason. We are, by nature, dangerous." "She was just a scared kid," Marcus said quietly. "Species doesn't matter when someone needs help." Dr. Vorthack's ears twitched, a sign of surprise. Marcus had learned. Species does not matter, she repeated slowly, as if testing the words. This is a human concept. I guess so. We have a saying, a child is a child. Doesn't matter what they look like or where they come from. If they're in trouble, you help them. The large Zephyrian was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. On Zephyr Prime, she said finally, we have a different saying. Trust only the pack, for all others are prey or predator. It has served us well for thousands of cycles. Has it? Marcus asked before he could stop himself. I mean, no offense, but doesn't that get lonely? Never trusting anyone outside your family. Dr. Vorthack's expression shifted slightly. For just a moment, Marcus thought he saw something almost vulnerable in those fierce eyes. Loneliness is preferable to death, she said. Trust the wrong being, and your pack suffers. But what if you're wrong? Marcus persisted. What if there are beings out there who would help instead of hurt? What if you're missing out on, I don't know, friendship, partnership, understanding? Before Dr. Vorthack could respond, the station's morning chime sounded, indicating the start of the primary shift. Almost immediately, the corridor began to fill with researchers heading to their labs. Marcus saw several beings stop and stare at the unusual gathering, a human, 3 Zephyrian cubs, and their pack leader having what appeared to be a friendly conversation. I should get these little ones back to our quarters, Dr. Vorthack said, standing with fluid grace. Kira, Zane, Pip, time to go. The 2 older cubs immediately responded to their mother's call, but Pip remained curled in Marcus's lap, apparently determined to stay put. Dr. Vorthack made a soft clicking sound, and the little cub's ears perked up, but it still didn't move. I think someone's made a new friend, Marcus said, gently stroking Pip's fur. The cub leaned into his touch, purring louder. So it would seem, Dr. Vorthack said, and Marcus was surprised to hear what sounded like amusement in her voice. Pip has always been selective about who she trusts. She has never shown affection for anyone outside our immediate pack. She's a sweetheart, Marcus said, meaning it. Despite everything he'd heard about Zephyrian ferocity, these cubs were just like any young animals, playful, affectionate, and eager for attention. Dr. Vorthack crouched down again and gently scooped Pip into her arms. The little cub protested with a soft whine, but didn't struggle. Perhaps, she said, looking directly at Marcus, our sayings do not have to define us forever. With that cryptic comment, she turned and headed down the corridor, her cubs following in single file. Marcus watched them go, his mind racing. Something significant had just happened, but he wasn't sure exactly what. All he knew was that 3 Zephyrian cubs had chosen to spend their morning with a human custodian, and their pack leader hadn't torn him apart for it. As he stood up and dusted off his uniform, Marcus noticed that several researchers were still staring at him. A few looked curious, others seemed concerned, and one, a tall, insectoid being from the Hive Collective, appeared to be taking notes on a data pad. Marcus had a feeling his quiet life on the research station was about to become much more complicated. But as he headed to the supply closet to gather his equipment for the day's shift, he found himself looking forward to whatever came next. For the first time since arriving at the station, he felt like he might actually be making friends. He just hoped those friendships wouldn't get him killed. Word traveled fast on a space station. By the time Marcus finished his morning rounds, half the research staff had heard about his encounter with the Zephyrian cubs. Most kept their distance, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and concern, as if he might suddenly sprout claws and start hunting. Others, however, seemed genuinely intrigued by the development. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's xenobiologist and one of the few other humans aboard, cornered him during his lunch break in the commissary. Marcus, what the hell are you doing? She asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Elena was in her 50s, with graying hair and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that came from years of studying alien life forms. Half the station is buzzing about you and the Zephyrians. Some of the researchers are placing bets on when you'll end up as someone's lunch. Marcus looked up from his meal. Synthetic protein that tasted vaguely like chicken, if chicken had been left in a freezer for several years. I'm not doing anything. I help a lost cub, and apparently that was noteworthy. Noteworthy? Elena leaned forward. Marcus, Zephyrians don't socialize outside their pack. Ever. The fact that those cubs sought you out this morning is, well, it's unprecedented. Dr. Kethvar from the Reptilian Research Division thinks you've been drugged with some kind of Zephyrian pheromone. Dr. Silex is convinced you're part of some elaborate hunting strategy. And what do you think? Marcus asked. Elena was quiet for a moment, studying his face. I think you did something stupid and kind, and now you're in completely uncharted territory. Zephyrians are apex predators. Marcus. Their entire social structure is based on pack hierarchy and territorial dominance. The idea that they would accept an outsider, especially a human. She shook her head. It goes against everything we know about their species. Maybe what we know is wrong, Marcus suggested. Or maybe it's just incomplete. Before Elena could respond, a commotion near the commissary entrance drew their attention. Dr. Vorthak had entered, followed by her 3 cubs. The large Zephyrian's presence immediately commanded attention, and conversations died as beings throughout the room turned to watch. What happened next defied every protocol and expectation Marcus had learned about Zephyrian behavior. Instead of heading to the carnivore section of the commissary, the area specifically designed for predator species, Dr. Vorthak led her cubs directly to Marcus's table. Custodian Chun, she said formally, inclining her head slightly. May we join you for the midday meal? The commissary had gone completely silent. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes watching, waiting for his response. Elena looked like she was about to have a heart attack. Of course, Marcus said, gesturing to the empty chairs around their table. Please, Dr. Vorthak settled her large frame into a chair that creaked ominously under her weight, while her cubs climbed into the remaining seats. Pip immediately scooted her chair closer to Marcus, while Kira and Zane flanked their mother like tiny bodyguards. This is unprecedented, Elena whispered, her scientific curiosity overriding her concern. Zephyrians have never voluntarily shared space with other species during feeding time. It's considered a vulnerable activity. Dr. Vorthak's ears twitched, indicating she'd heard the comment. Dr. Vasquez is correct, she said. Under normal circumstances, my pack would not choose to feed in the presence of potential threats. However, circumstances have become unusual. Unusual how? Marcus asked, accepting a small thermal pack from Pip, who had apparently decided to share her lunch with him. The contents looked like some kind of frozen meat paste, but the gesture was touching. My cubs have declared you to be pack friend, Dr. Vorthak said. This is a status that does not exist in our traditional social structure. Zephyrians recognize only packmate, pack leader, prey, predator, and threat. The concept of friend is foreign to us, but not unpleasant. Marcus asked hopefully. Dr. Vorthak considered this. It is confusing, but my cubs seem happier since meeting you. Pip has not had a thermal stress episode since yesterday. Kira has been more social with her littermates. Zane asked me 17 questions about humans this morning. She paused. This is unusual behavior for all of them. Elena was frantically taking notes on her datapad. Dr. Vorthak, would you be willing to participate in a formal study? This social development could revolutionize our understanding of Zephyrian psychology. The large alien's expression hardened slightly. We are not specimens to be studied, Dr. Vasquez. We are sapient beings capable of growth and change, just as any other species. I didn't mean to offend, Elena started, but Dr. Vorthak held up a clawed hand. No offense was taken, but perhaps the question should be, why does this development surprise you? Why is the possibility of friendship between our species so difficult for humans to accept? The question hung in the air for a moment. Marcus realized that Dr. Vorthak had turned the entire situation around, making them the subjects of observation rather than her and her cubs. Because you're predators, Elena said finally. Everything we know about evolution and interspecies relationships suggests that predator and prey species can't form meaningful bonds. And yet, Dr. Vorthak said, gesturing to her cubs, who were contentedly eating their lunch while staying close to Marcus, here we are. Zane, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, suddenly spoke up. His voice was higher than his mother's, with a slight lisp common to young Zephyrians. Pack friend Marcus smells like safety, he said solemnly. Not like prey, not like predator. Like den warmth. Den warmth, Marcus asked. The scent of home, Dr. Vorthak translated. A place where one can rest without fear. She looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. High praise from one so young. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Station Commander Zarek, a tall, blue-skinned humanoid from the Altarian Republic. The commander's expression was unreadable as he stopped beside their table, his 4 arms clasped behind his back in a gesture Marcus recognized as military formal. Dr. Vorthak, the commander said in his precise, clipped accent. I trust everything is proceeding normally with your research. Quite normally, Commander, Dr. Vorthak replied, though Marcus detected a slight tension in her voice. Is there a concern? Several researchers have expressed curiosity about recent developments regarding interspecies interaction protocols. I wanted to ensure that proper procedures are being followed. It was a politely worded threat, Marcus realized. The commander was making it clear that their unusual friendship was being monitored. Custodian Shun has violated no protocols, Dr. Vorthak said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. Nor have my cubs. We are free to associate with whomever we choose during non-research hours. Of course, Commander Zarek agreed. I merely wanted to remind everyone that the station maintains strict guidelines regarding the safety and well-being of all residents, particularly when it comes to interactions between predator and non-predator species. Are you suggesting my cubs pose a threat to Custodian Shun? Dr. Vorthak asked, rising slightly from her chair. Even seated, she was taller than the standing commander, and the implied threat was unmistakable. Not at all, the commander said quickly. I'm simply ensuring that proper precautions are being taken. Pip chose that moment to climb out of her chair and onto Marcus's lap, where she curled up and began purring. The sight of the tiny predator cub treating the human as a piece of furniture seemed to deflate the commander's concerns. I see, he said dryly. Yes, terrifying indeed. Carry on. As the commander walked away, Marcus heard several researchers snickering at nearby tables. Dr. Vorthak settled back into her chair, a sound that might have been laughter rumbling in her chest. It seems our friendship is causing quite a stir, she observed. Is that a problem? Marcus asked, gently stroking Pip's fur as the little cub dozed in his lap. Perhaps, Dr. Vorthak admitted. Change is often frightening, even when it is beneficial. Many beings prefer the safety of known prejudices to the uncertainty of new understanding. Elena, who had been unusually quiet during the exchange with the commander, finally spoke up. Dr. Vorthak, what changed? What made you willing to consider friendship with a human when your species has avoided such relationships for millennia? Dr. Vorthak was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes fixed on Marcus. Perhaps, she said finally, it was realizing that sometimes the most dangerous thing is not the predator you can see, but the assumptions you cannot question. She stood, gathering her cubs. Pip protested being moved from Marcus's lap, but allowed herself to be scooped up by her mother. We will see you tomorrow, pack friend Marcus, Dr. Vorthak said formally. As they left the commissary, Marcus noticed that conversations gradually resumed around the room. But the atmosphere had changed somehow. Where before there had been curiosity and concern, now there seemed to be a sense of possibility, as if the entire station was beginning to reconsider its assumptions about what was and wasn't possible between different species. You know, Elena said, watching the Zephyrians disappear down the corridor, this could change everything. Not just for human-Zephyrian relations, but for interspecies diplomacy across the galaxy. If apex predators can form friendships with other species, then maybe the galaxy doesn't have to be as lonely as we thought. Marcus finished. As he returned to his afternoon duties, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed in just 2 days. He'd gone from being an invisible custodian to being the center of a potential diplomatic revolution, all because he'd given his coat to a cold, scared child. Sometimes, he mused, the smallest acts of kindness had the biggest consequences. He just hoped he was ready for whatever came next. The emergency alarm shattered the station's usual quiet at 0347 hours, jolting Marcus awake in his quarters. Red lights flashed in the corridor outside, and the station's AI announced in its calm, emotionless voice, "Hull breach in Section 12. All personnel evacuate immediately." This is not a drill. Marcus threw on his clothes and raced toward his emergency station, but as he rounded the corner into the main corridor, he nearly collided with Dr. Vorthak. The Zephyrian was moving at full speed, her expression more panicked than he'd ever seen. "The Cubs," she said without preamble. They were in the environmental lab for their sleep cycle. Section 12. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Section 12 was on the outer ring of the station, where a hull breach would be catastrophic. The emergency bulkheads would have sealed automatically, but if the Cubs had been caught on the wrong side. The evacuation route from 12 leads through 11, Marcus said, his mind racing through the station's layout. If they followed protocol, they are Cubs, Dr. Vorthak interrupted, her voice tight with fear. Frightened Cubs in an emergency. They will not follow protocol. They will hide. Without another word, both of them sprinted towards Section 12. The corridors were filled with evacuating personnel, all moving away from the breach site. Swimming against the current of fleeing beings, Marcus and Dr. Vorthak fought their way toward the emergency. They reached the bulkhead separating Section 11 from 12 to find it sealed tight, its red warning lights indicating catastrophic decompression on the other side. A group of emergency technicians was working frantically at a control panel, while Commander Zurek coordinated the evacuation. "The section is sealed," the commander reported when he saw Dr. Vorthak. "Atmosphere is gone. If anyone was caught inside." "My Cubs are in there," Dr. Vorthak said, her voice deadly quiet. The commander's expression became pained. "Dr. Vorthak, I'm sorry, but the sensors show no life signs in Section 12. The breach was massive. The entire section lost atmosphere in less than 30 seconds. Dr. Vorthak's legs seemed to give out, and she collapsed against the wall. For the first time since Marcus had known her, the fierce predator looked utterly broken. "My children," she whispered. Marcus studied the emergency technician's work, his mind racing. "What about the environmental lab's emergency protocols?" he asked suddenly. "Do they have independent life support?" One of the technicians, a spider-like being from the Arachnid Collective, looked up from its work. "Yes, but the power coupling was damaged in the breach. Even if the lab sealed itself, they would have maybe 30 minutes of air." "How long has it been?" Marcus asked. 27 minutes, Commander Zurek replied grimly. Dr. Vorthak made a sound like a wounded animal. "I have to get to them. Open the bulkhead." "Dr. Vorthak, that's suicide," the commander said firmly. "The moment we open that seal, Section 11 will decompress. We'd lose the entire outer ring. There has to be another way," Marcus said desperately. He couldn't stand to see Dr. Vorthak in such pain, and the thought of those 3 innocent Cubs trapped and suffocating was unbearable. "What about the maintenance shafts?" The spider technician's multiple eyes focused on him. "The shafts connect all sections, but they're not pressurized. Anyone going through there would need full environmental gear, and..." It paused, its mandibles clicking nervously. "The breach damaged the shaft's structural integrity. It could collapse at any moment." "How big are the shafts?" Marcus asked. 2 meters by 2 meters. "Why would you?" The technician stopped, understanding dawning in its compound eyes. "You're not thinking of going in there." "I'm small enough to navigate the damage," Marcus said, already heading toward the nearest maintenance access. "And someone has to try." The suit lockers were in Section 12. Commander Zurek protested. You'd have no environmental protection. Dr. Vorthack suddenly straightened, her grief transforming into something like hope. Zephyrians can survive in vacuum for short periods, she said. Our cubs, even longer. Their metabolism's slow in response to environmental stress. If they made it to the lab's emergency shelter, then we still have time, Marcus finished. But not much. This is madness, the commander said. I cannot authorize a rescue mission with such minimal chance of success. You're not authorizing it, Marcus replied. King opened the maintenance access hatch. I'm going whether you approve or not. Those cubs are going to die if someone doesn't try. Dr. Vorthack grabbed his arm as he prepared to climb into the shaft. Pack friend Marcus, this is too dangerous. I cannot ask you to risk your life for my young. You're not asking, Marcus said gently. I'm choosing. That's what friends do. We choose to help, even when it's dangerous. For a moment, Dr. Vorthack's fierce expression crumbled, revealing something vulnerable and grateful underneath. If you bring my cubs home, she said quietly, the Zephyrian people will be in your debt forever. Just have a medical team ready, Marcus replied, climbing into the maintenance shaft. I'll be back with them in 15 minutes. The shaft was cramped and dark, lit only by emergency lighting that flickered intermittently. As Marcus crawled through the narrow space, he could hear the station's superstructure groaning around him, a reminder of just how precarious his situation was. The metal beneath his hands was cold, and he could feel vibrations through the hull that suggested continued structural damage. It took him 8 precious minutes to reach Section 12, navigating around twisted metal and debris that had been thrown into the shafts by the explosive decompression. When he finally reached the environmental lab's access panel, his hands were cut and bleeding from the sharp edges, and he was breathing hard from exertion and adrenaline. The lab's emergency lighting was still functioning, casting an eerie green glow over the scene. The main lab space was a disaster. Equipment scattered everywhere, viewports cracked, atmosphere definitely gone. But in the corner, Marcus could see the emergency shelter, a small, pod-like structure designed to protect occupants during catastrophic events. His heart leaped when he saw 3 small shapes huddled inside the transparent aluminum bubble. The cubs were alive, though clearly in distress. Their silver fur had taken on a blue tinge from oxygen deprivation, and they were moving sluggishly. Marcus crawled to the shelter and activated the communication system. Hey kids, he said softly. It's pack friend Marcus. I'm here to take you home. 3 pairs of violet eyes turned toward him, hope flickering in their depths. Pip pressed her small paw against the inside of the shelter, directly across from where Marcus's hand rested on the outside. The shelter's status display showed critical air levels, maybe 3 minutes of breathing mixture left. Marcus quickly accessed the emergency release protocols, but his heart sank when he read the warnings. Opening the shelter would expose the cubs to hard vacuum, but keeping it closed meant they'd suffocate. Then he had an idea. It was crazy, probably suicidal, but it might work. Marcus began stripping off his maintenance uniform, starting with his heavy work jacket. The shaft's atmosphere was thin but present. The emergency seals had held in this section, though barely. If he could create a makeshift airlock using his clothing. Working frantically, Marcus used his jacket, shirt, and even his belt to create a seal around the shelter's opening. It wouldn't hold pressure for long, but it might give them enough time to crawl back to safety. The cubs watched with growing understanding as he worked, their intelligence evident even in their weakened state. Okay, here's the plan. Marcus said through the comm, when I open the shelter, you're going to hold your breath and follow me through that shaft as fast as you can. No stopping, no looking back. Can you do that? 3 small heads nodded solemnly. Marcus took a deep breath, triggered the release, and pulled all 3 cubs against his chest as his makeshift seal failed, and the last of the shelter's atmosphere rushed out. The cubs were surprisingly light, their bodies adapted for climbing and jumping. They clung to him with their small claws, trusting him completely. The crawl back through the maintenance shaft was a nightmare. Marcus's lungs burned as he held what little air he'd managed to capture, while the cub's weight made every movement difficult. Twice, debris shifted around them, and Marcus was sure they were about to be crushed. But somehow they kept moving. When they finally burst through the access hatch into Section 11, Marcus collapsed to the floor, gasping. The cubs rolled away from him, their breathing rapid and shallow but steady. Dr. Vorthak was there immediately, gathering her children to her chest and making soft, comforting sounds in her native language. "Medical team to Section 11 immediately," Commander Zirek called out. "All 3 cubs are alive. Repeat, all 3 cubs are alive." As the medical technicians swarmed around them, Marcus found himself being examined by Dr. Vasquez. "You magnificent idiot," she said, running a scanner over his chest. "Your lungs are full of metal particulates, you're hypothermic, and you've lost about 1 liter of blood from those cuts. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that no parent should have to lose their children," Marcus replied weakly. Dr. Vorthak appeared beside his medical gurney, her cubs bundled in thermal blankets and receiving oxygen therapy. They looked exhausted but alert, and when they saw Marcus, all 3 began making soft chittering sounds, the Zephyrian equivalent of relieved laughter. "Pack friend Marcus," Dr. Vorthak said formally, "you have done something today that will be remembered among my people for generations. You risked your life to save cubs that were not your own, of a species that most beings fear. This is the truest definition of courage. Anyone would have done the same." Marcus mumbled, fatigue and medical sedatives making him drowsy. "No," Dr. Vorthak said firmly. "They would not. And that pack friend, Marcus, is what makes you and your species so remarkable. You choose kindness even when logic suggests fear. You choose sacrifice even when survival suggests selfishness." As Marcus was wheeled toward the medical bay, he could hear Dr. Vorthak speaking to Commander Zirek in low, urgent tones. He caught fragments of the conversation, something about formal recognition, about sending messages to the Zephyrian homeworld, about unprecedented acts of interspecies valor. But mostly, Marcus was focused on the soft sound of 3 small cubs purring contentedly as they were reunited with their mother. He'd done the right thing, even if it had nearly killed him. That was enough. Marcus spent 3 days in the medical bay, recovering from his injuries and the effects of vacuum exposure. When he was finally cleared for release, he expected to return to his normal routine as quietly as he'd left it. Instead, he found his quarters filled with gifts from species he'd never even interacted with before. There were healing crystals from the Silicate Collective, nutritional supplements from the Botanical Consortium, and what appeared to be a hand-carved sculpture from the Stone Shapers of Rigel 7. Most touching was a small thermal regulation device from the Zephyrian research team, clearly designed to ensure he'd never be cold while working night shifts again. Dr. Vasquez was waiting for him when he returned, along with an unexpected visitor, Admiral Saren of the Galactic Defense Force, a distinguished Altarian whose blue skin bore the ceremonial tattoos of the highest military rank. "Custodian Chun," the Admiral said formally, rising from Marcus's single chair. "I'm honored to meet you." Marcus looked between Elena and the Admiral, confused. "I'm sorry, sir, but I think there's been some mistake. I'm just maintenance staff." "Indeed," Admiral Saren said, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Maintenance staff who single-handedly prevented a diplomatic crisis that could have destabilized the entire galactic community. I don't understand." Elena pulled up a chair, gesturing for Marcus to sit on his bed. "Marcus, Dr. Vorthak didn't just send a message to the Zephyrian Research Council about what you did. She sent a formal report to the Pack Leaders' Assembly on Zephyr Prime. Do you know what that means?" Marcus shook his head. "It means that every Zephyrian Pack Leader in the galaxy now knows that a human risked his life to save Zephyrian cubs," Admiral Saren explained. "Dr. Vorthak's report has been read before the Grand Assembly, and they voted to formally recognize humans as what they call Honor Pack, beings worthy of trust and protection. This has never happened before," Elena added excitedly. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, no non-Zephyrian species has ever been granted honor pack status. Ever. Marcus felt overwhelmed. But I did what anyone would do. No, Admiral Saren said firmly. You did what a human would do. And that distinction is changing how every species in the galaxy thinks about your people. Before Marcus could respond, his door chimed. Come in, he called, and was surprised to see Dr. Vorthak enter, followed by her 3 cubs and 2 other adult Zephyrians he didn't recognize. Pack friend Marcus, Dr. Vorthak said formally. I present Pack Leader Thane Vorthak of the Silver Fawn Clan and Huntmaster Vera of the Stoneclaw Pack. They have come from Zephyr Prime specifically to meet you. The 2 new Zephyrians were even more imposing than Dr. Vorthak, if that were possible. Pack Leader Thane was massive, with silver fur marked by distinctive black stripes that indicated his high rank. Huntmaster Vera was smaller, but radiated an aura of deadly competence that made Marcus's survival instincts scream warnings. Human Marcus, Pack Leader Thane said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. You have done our people great honor. By saving cubs not of your own pack, you have demonstrated the highest virtues of our culture: courage, selflessness, and protection of the young. We have come to offer you a choice, Huntmaster Vera added, her violet eyes studying Marcus intently. The Pack Leaders' Assembly has voted to extend an invitation for humanity to join the Greater Pack Alliance. This would grant your species protected status throughout Zephyrian space, trading rights with 17 systems, and, most importantly, guaranteed aid in times of need. Admiral Saren leaned forward. Marcus, this is unprecedented. The Zephyrians have never allied with another species. Their territory includes some of the galaxy's richest mining systems and most strategically important trade routes. An alliance with them would transform humanity's position in galactic politics. But, Pack Leader Thane continued, the alliance is contingent upon you accepting the role of Pack Speaker for humanity. You would serve as the official liaison between our peoples, the living symbol of the bond between our species. Marcus felt the weight of their expectations settling on his shoulders. I'm honored, but I'm not a diplomat. I don't know anything about politics or trade negotiations or, about kindness, Pip interrupted suddenly, speaking for the first time since the rescue. Her small voice was clear and confident. You know about helping when someone is scared. That's more important than politics. Kira nodded enthusiastically. Pack friend Marcus saved us because he cares about cubs. All cubs, not just human cubs. And that, Huntmaster Vera said with something that might have been a smile, is exactly why you are the right choice for this role. Dr. Vorthak stepped forward. Marcus, I've studied your species for 3 years, trying to understand what makes humans different from other sapiens. Yesterday, I found my answer. Humans possess something that most species lose as they advance technologically: the instinct to care for young that are not their own. This trait makes you uniquely suited for interspecies relations. Think about it, Marcus, Elena urged. You could help establish new relationships between humans and dozens of species. Your example has already shown that predator and prey species can be friends, partners, even family. Marcus looked around the crowded room at the expectant faces, human, Zephyrian, and Altarian. All of them were waiting for his decision, all of them believing he was capable of something he wasn't sure he could do. Then, Zane spoke up. Will you still be our pack friend if you become pack speaker? He asked anxiously. The question cut straight to Marcus's heart. Always, he said without hesitation. No matter what happens, you 3 will always be my cubs too. All 3 young Zephyrians purred happily, and Marcus realized he'd just answered the larger question as well. Admiral Saren, Marcus said, turning to face the distinguished military officer. If I accept this position, I have some conditions. Name them. First, I want Dr. Vasquez as my scientific advisor. If we're going to build bridges between species, we need someone who understands xenobiology. Elena beamed. I'd be honored. Second, I want regular cultural exchange programs. Not just trade and politics. I want families from different species to spend time together, to learn about each other. Real understanding comes from personal connections, not government treaties. Pack Leader Thane nodded approvingly. This shows wisdom. We accept your conditions. And third, Marcus said, looking directly at Dr. Vorthak, I want the right to continue working as a custodian on this station. Diplomacy is important, but I don't want to lose touch with ordinary people living ordinary lives. That's where real change happens. Not in conference rooms, but in corridors where tired parents worry about their children. Dr. Vorthak's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then she threw back her head and laughed, a sound like wind through ice caverns. Only a human would insist on continuing to clean floors while reshaping galactic civilization, she said. Yes, Pack Speaker Marcus. We accept all your conditions. Admiral Saren stood and offered Marcus his hand. Then, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I officially welcome humanity's first Pack Speaker to the Diplomatic Corps. Your first assignment will be facilitating the formal alliance ceremony on Zephyr Prime next month. As they shook hands, Marcus felt the surreal nature of his situation settling in. 3 days ago, he'd been a night shift custodian whose biggest concern was fixing malfunctioning air recyclers. Now he was apparently humanity's ambassador to an entire species of apex predators, and all because he'd given his coat to a cold, scared child. Pack Speaker Marcus, Pip said solemnly, climbing into his lap with the casual entitlement of the very young. When we go to the home world, will you tell the other pack leaders about how humans share warmth with cold cubs? I'll tell them everything, little one, Marcus promised, gently stroking her soft fur. I'll tell them about human kindness and human courage and how sometimes the smallest gestures can change everything. Master Vera watched this interaction with keen interest. On Zephyr Prime, she said thoughtfully, there is an ancient saying, trust is built one act at a time, but broken in a moment. Your species understands this truth instinctively. What do you mean? Marcus asked. You did not save our cubs to gain political advantage or to impress potential allies, she explained. You saved them because they were children in need, and that was reason enough. This simple honesty will serve you well in the challenges ahead. As the various officials began discussing the practical details of his new role, Marcus found himself thinking about the night he'd first encountered Kira in that maintenance alcove. She'd been shivering and, alone, a small creature in distress who needed help. He'd given her his coat without thinking about consequences or complications. Now, that simple act of kindness was reshaping relationships between species across the galaxy. The Zephyrians were ready to trust humanity because one human had proven trustworthy. Other species were reconsidering their assumptions about both predators and humans. The entire political landscape was shifting because someone had cared enough to help. Pack Speaker Marcus, Dr. Vorthak said as the meeting began to wind down. Do you understand what you have accomplished? Marcus looked around the room, at Elena's excited expression, at Admiral Saren's respectful nod, at the 3 cubs who had claimed him as family, at the imposing Zephyrian leaders who now called him friend. I think I'm beginning to, he said quietly. I gave a scared kid my coat, and somehow that proved that different species can care about each other. That we don't have to be enemies just because we're different. Yes, Dr. Vorthak said. And in doing so, you prove that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not superior technology or military might. It is the radical idea that strangers can become family, that enemies can become friends, and that a single act of kindness can echo across the stars. As his quarters finally emptied and Marcus was left alone with his thoughts, he realized that his life would never be simple again. He would travel to alien worlds, negotiate treaties, and represent his entire species in ways he'd never imagined possible. But at its heart, his new role was really just an extension of what he'd always done, taking care of others, fixing things that were broken, and making sure everyone had what they needed to feel safe and welcome. Some challenges were bigger than malfunctioning air recyclers, but The fundamental principles remain the same. Show up, pay attention, help where you can, and remember that behind every scary exterior was usually someone who just wanted to be understood. Marcus smiled as he settled down for the night, already planning the cultural exchange programs he wanted to establish. Tomorrow, he would begin the complex work of building bridges between species. But tonight he was content knowing that 3 small cubs were sleeping safely in their den, warm and protected and loved. Sometimes, that was enough to change the universe.